Hey guys, today we're taking a look at the Marvel Legends Cabal 3-pack of Taskmaster, Iron Patriot, and Doctor Doom. As usual, please like, share, comment, subscribe, or even hit the super thanks button. I do appreciate all engagement on my channel. A quick look at the box, and it's got the Marvel 85 years anniversary deco. The figures are placed nicely on this plastic window. The bottom of the box, we have product information. Onto the side, artwork of the Cabal fighting. Onto the back, description of the characters, and the bigger version of the artwork. We can see Loki in the corner over here. And down to that last side, it's just more of that same open window down the side. Now getting this one open, the figures come in the tray in front, with the secondary tray at the back holding the rest of the accessories. Dr. Doom comes with his trusty old school pistol. This one is cast in a gunmetal grey. Exactly the same sculpt with the previous release of Doctor Doom from the Super Skrull Build-A-Figure wave. He holds the pistol in his right trigger hand just fine, and also storing away conveniently on the holster at the right side of his belt. And the holster can be buckled up, so the pistol stays inside firmly. He comes with two fists cast in a dull metallic plastic. These two fists are articulated in and out, and going onto the figure just fine when you want to have him getting ready for a fist fight. And finally, he comes with an alternate head for the Doombot version, and I do like the sculpting on this very much. With the skeletal features and the very stark red eyes, he looks just like a Terminator. The textures are also nicely brought out thanks to a subtle black printing that works a little bit like a wash, so bringing out every single feature like the teeth and his nasal cavity. The rest of the head is a smooth tech design, definitely brings out the cyborg element of this character. The head pops onto the figure just fine, and is a good display option since we've got a couple of Marvel Legends Doctor Dooms already. Doctor Doom is largely the same sculpt with the first release version. Obviously this one over here, my copy is customized with soft goods for the cape and his tunic. The newly tooled parts are his hood, his torso to integrate that fabric cape, and a shorter skirt. And clearly he's a very different sculpt from this version of Doctor Doom on the right. There's an interesting mix of reuse and retooling on his head sculpt. The inner head is reused from the alternate head sculpt that came with the first release Doctor Doom, same treatment of the flesh tone plastic as an insert behind the metallic plastic for his mask. There's still a little bit of problem in the production quality. As you can see, the inside of his mouth is not very well aligned with his metallic mask, so it looks as if his head is sitting misaligned with his mask. Now the sculpt of his plastic hood is the same as the first version of Doctor Doom, even down to the way it wrinkles with the tip at the end. But on the front, the sculpt is modified a little bit, so the hood doesn't go all the way in to cover his neck. His new torso over here is cast in a green plastic with brown paint for the thread that goes into the collar of his tunic. It still has a textured feeling for the fabric, and the new tooling lets Hasbro integrate a soft fabric cape. This fabric cape is also a dull green that matches this tunic, and it's also stretchy in nature. The cape falls quite nicely in the vanilla stance. It's also stitched quite well so that it folds nicely and falls over the top of his shoulders. But a small limitation is that you can't really pose the cape over his shoulders. It looks crinkly and sticks out, unlike a posable fabric cape over here on my custom that lets you freely pose the cape, hiding his shoulders, or even posing it all the way above his shoulders. So I think Hasbro's heading in the right direction using fabric for capes, but they really need to step up even more by inserting metal wire into the cape and making it posable. Otherwise it just hangs limply even in action stances. Now the new tooling also means that you can remove the clasp from his torso, but that exposes the two holes on the front, and that's quite unsightly. You do have the option of removing the cape and fitting those clasps back onto his torso to cover those holes. And in this state, I'd like to have him with his Doombot head popped on instead. Now although his armor is exactly the same sculpt as the first release, the treatment of his armor is different. I'm not saying it's better, but it definitely looks like it has more depth. I like the luster on the original plastic. There's a real shine to it and it stands out as armor. The plastic used this time has less of a shine to it, looking more dull and more like vintage armor. But Hasbro has decided to paint the chainmail sculpt at his joints in between the armor plates. So I do like that hit of paint, and it adds more depth to the armor. Now his belt appears to be the same sculpt, this time with a different shade of brown plastic and the gold for his buckle, but it's definitely retooled since it's one single piece together with his shorter skirt. It's still a very rigid plastic, but you can bend it out of the way and get his legs to articulate forward. And onto his leg armor. Once again, it's the same sculpt, but he does have the same paint treatment for the chainmail at his knees, so that's a nice touch even though that's on the back of the figure. What's lacking this time is there's no paint for the straps that's keeping his armor together, instead just looking like a dull silver. I also like to point out that with the cape off, the sculpt of the two thrusters on the back are now more obvious, and I'm appropriating the blast effects from Iron Patriot, sticking them in so he looks like he's blasting off. And this is a nice and cool feature to have for Dr. Doom without his cape showing off his thrusters in action. So even though most of the figure is reused on the armored parts, there's enough subtle new tooling to integrate new features like the fabric cape. So that's good effort to Hasbro on that part. However, I do want to point out that my figure seems to be cantered slightly to his left, almost as if his left leg is shorter than his right. And I do hope that is just a production issue on my copy and not a general mold degradation. So now let's take a look at his articulation with the cape and hood off. The head is on a ball hinge at the top and also a ball at the bottom, so it combines pretty well to give him very good range looking down as well as up. The ball at the top is quite tight, but you can spin his head all the way 360. He also is able to tilt left and right quite well. Swivel hinge at the shoulders that go all the way around, coming out that far, with a bicep swivel over here for 360. Double hinged elbows with those pins still visible but less obvious thanks to the armor parts on the sides of the elbow, getting past 90 degrees. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin, going in and out. With a trigger hand on the right side, this hinge goes down as well as up, as you'd expect from a trigger hand. Ball joint at the torso that spins all the way around, getting a little bit of sideways tilting as well. The sculpt interferes with the belt a little bit, so you might have to shimmy it as you bend him backward as well as forward. He's got slits on the sides of his skirt, so those ball joints at his hips do go out that much. And going forward and backward, with quite a bit of effort, you can get him into a sitting position. He still also has that thigh swivel, so it goes out and in. Double hinge at the knees, again with those pins still visible, nicely covered up by the side armor plates, and gets beyond 90 degrees. Swivel just above the ankle for spin outwards and inwards. Ankle joint for upward that much and more downward. And finally ankle pivot that goes out as well as in. So here's a quick mod to give him more upward range in his ankle. I used a hairdryer to heat this part up and popped up his foot. And over here you can see a redundant piece of plastic. So shaving off that piece of plastic over here using a hobby knife. So now heating and popping back his left ankle, you can see that the range is improved compared to the one on his right, which is the before. And knowing that he's got quite limited upward ankle range, I'll take the slight improvement. Now as far as head swaps go, the Doombot head does pop onto the previous Dr. Doom figure. Even though the shades of metallic plastic are different, it's still fudgeable. Now the modern mask from the previous Dr. Doom figure also pops onto the new one just fine. Slight difference in the shades of greens for the hood and the tunic. It's slightly distracting, but probably also fudgeable if you can play with lighting in your photos. The unmasked head of Dr. Doom from this figure also pops on just fine. However, the Doombot head fits well on this figure, but the different shades of metallic plastic doesn't match too well. Taskmaster comes with a whole bunch of weapons, but let's take a look at his bow and arrow first. The arrow is cast in a red plastic, brown paint for the rest of it, and gold for the tip. The bow is a translucent plastic, as you can see from the exposed part that's supposed to be the string over here, and brown paint over here with cream for the handle. It's possible to pose him somewhat convincingly with the bow and arrow, but because the string doesn't pull back, it's what it is. But I do like the combination of colors on the bow and arrow, so it looks interesting. And if you don't want him to be holding onto the bow and arrow all the time, you can store the arrow at the back. And also sling his bow onto the quiver so it stores away conveniently. The only thing that makes me a little nervous is Hasbro has a track record of the paint coming off the weapons easily, so I'm afraid the brown paint might stain the white on his cape. He also comes with a skinny pistol. This one is reused many times on many characters. This time it is cast in a plain black plastic. The pistol goes into his right trigger hand just fine, and also conveniently stores away on the holster on his right thigh. He comes with a sword, and this one's been reused many times. Cast in a golden looking plastic, cream for the handle once again, and silver paint for the blade. I also like how his shield is executed with that shiny white plastic for the base and very sharp paint applications for the dark blues and the orange for his logo. On the reverse side, it's got the usual Marvel Legends shield mechanism with the peg or the clip. You can slide the peg into the grip on his left hand, or utilizing this clip onto his wrist just fine as well. And being a skilled combatant with so many weapons, I'm just glad that Hasbro has taken a leaf from the G.I. Joe Classified series line and given a solution for weapon storage on Taskmaster, so he holds on to his sword and shield with the other weapons storing nicely on his body. So I'm really pleased with the way their figure looks like this, completely decked out with all his weapons. You can pop off his head and remove that cape, exposing a small hole on his back. So it's possible to peg in the shield onto his back, but it looks a little awkward, slightly unnatural because it sits a little too high. Finally, he also comes with alternate hands, 2 fists, and the one relaxed hand that's conspicuous from its lack of a complete pair. And all the alternate hands have hinges that articulate in and out. And of course, the alternate hands pop onto the figure just fine, so you have different display options. Now onto the sculpt of the figure, and he's mostly on the Vulcan body mold, with of course a lot of unique parts that make him the Taskmaster, like his cape, his hood, the straps, belt, as well as the nicely sculpted gloves and boots. Now Hasbro have slightly undermined themselves with the developments in the capes, simply by having a nice fabric cape over here on Dr. Doom, but Taskmaster is still stuck with the thick, rigid and hard, heavy cape that makes him feel just kind of a little stuck in the past. I would have definitely liked for Hasbro to have tried something a little more innovative, especially with the integration of the arrow quiver onto a fabric cape. I do love that head sculpt very much. It is crammed with texture and detail, and all of that is brought out by that subtle printing that works like a wash. So you see the lines in his furrowed brow, that nasal cavity, as well as his teeth, and the very skeletal structure of his mask. Those deep set eyes are also brought out really nicely with the yellow paint for the irises and the black that surrounds it. So overall, fantastic job, topped off with that white plastic hood. Now this is me nitpicking, but because the head sculpt is so well executed and sculpted, it is a stark contrast with the more simple aesthetic and sculpting of the rest of the body. His torso is that dark blue plastic, as well as the top of his shoulders and arms. Very sharp applications of the orange and white paint. Very little bleeding on the top of his chest, so that's very well done. The torso is accessorized with brown plastic for the strap that runs across his chest, as well as the belt. Once again, also very sharp paint applications for the gold buckle over here, and the very nice Taskmaster logo on his belt buckle that really brings the whole figure together. The rest of his arms are actually an orange plastic with dark blue paint for the top, and separate white plastic pieces for his gloves. Once again, looking very clean down his arm. The cape is a hard orange plastic with gold paint for the clasps that run down the front of his chest, and white paint that's applied quite thickly on the back of the cape. But because it's applied quite thickly and uniformly, you don't see any of that orange plastic coming out from below, so Hasbro has done a good job with keeping the white looking very clean on the back. And of course, it's also integrated with a blue plastic quiver that stores his arrows, which are themselves also separate pieces of red plastic and brown paint for the ends. So that's a nice touch of detail and adds some color to the back of the figure as well. He's got white trunks, dark blue for the rest of his legs, brown holster with once again the nice gold paint for the buckle, golden looking plastic for his strap on his left thigh, that once again also adds more features to the action figure. Finally, he's got the white plastic boots. So overall, the Taskmaster look is captured very well, and the clean separation of the paints and plastics makes the figure look very neat. For articulation, he's got a ball hinge at the top of his neck, so he looks down that much. He looks upward that much, hindered by the back of his hood. He can look right as well as left. Butterfly joints at his shoulders, so they do go forward that much, as well as pulling them backward quite a decent bit. Swivel hinge at the shoulders that go up and down, as well as outward that much, followed by a bicep swivel. Double hinged elbows with the pins concealed, going way past 90 degrees, slightly hindered by the bulky sculpt of his glove and his big bicep. Swivel hinge at the wrist that goes 360, as well as articulating down as well as up. Mid-torso hinge, so he crunches forward and bending backward. Waist swivel that's very well disguised by that belt, so he goes left and right. Ball joints at the hips going out that far, and no problems with the range forward and backward as well. Thigh swivel over here that goes 360. Double hinge knees with the pins concealed and going a very good range, only hindered by that cuff at the top of his boot. He's got a swivel at the boot, but because of the way that the boot is sculpted and conforms to his calf, you can get it to rotate in and out, but it is quite tight. So I can force it to go a little further, but you would need a bit of effort to get it going. He's got ankle tilt that goes up a decent bit and down, and finally ankle pivot that goes out and in. Iron Patriot comes with two alternate hands with a more relaxed sculpt. These are cast in a red plastic with a little bit of metallic flecking, and that is a nice touch to make the red plastic look more metallic in nature. These relaxed hands also have ports on the inside, so they double up as repulsor hands. And of course, these hands are reused from the Extremist Iron Man action figure. He also comes with two blast effects cast in a translucent orange to yellow plastic. The alternate hands do pop onto the figure just fine, so you can have him in a more relaxed pose or with the repulsor blast coming out of those ports. He also comes with a helmeted head, white plastic for the face mask, orange paint for the separate inserts for his eyes, and black lining for the front. The rest of the helmet is that same red plastic with the flecking for the metallic look. And naturally the helmeted head pops onto the figure just fine. And this is a good transition to talk about the overall sculpt and paint of the figure. I will address the elephant in the room. Hasbro has swapped out the silvers seen on the production prototype in Robo's review for a white plastic and white paints all over the figure. As we take a closer look at some of the details, in Hasbro's defense, Hasbro tried to swap out the silver plastic with the white plastic that's got a little bit of metallic flecking in them, but sadly that effect is not obvious enough, so the white plastic ends up looking quite flat. The other parts with the white paint as well was meant to look a little more pearlescent as well, but that only looks obvious when you zoom in looking at details. From far, the white plastic and white paint looks incredibly flat, and overall makes the figure look a little cheap and kind of cheesy because of how the colors are really rich, clashing, and in a strange way kind of eat up at the sculpt, so a lot of the sculpting detail is lost as well. So if you like the rich and deep colors, this is probably for you. We could argue all day about the way that white and silver looks as is drawn in comics as well, but I think at the end of the day, how this figure looks is a matter of personal preference. While it looks cheap, I don't think it's necessarily bad. I don't hate the way that it looks right now, but I think that it certainly can be improved. And I'll show you how to do a little bit of mods later on. The Extremist Iron Man over here is a good indication of what I will do to make this figure look better. I've already done the panel lining on him, and that really brings out all the elements of his sculpted detail. Now back to the Iron Patriot. Even though he reuses a lot of parts from the Extremist Iron Man, like the lower torso, his arms, a lot of the new parts, like his upper torso, those shoulder pads, and his thighs, gives him a slightly bulkier aesthetic and makes him look more sinister. The new parts also give him that slight boost in height. Iron Patriot's unhelmeted head is reused from the retro green Goblin action figure, and because that figure was shorter and smaller, this head looks a little undersized for his armored body. The updated technology and paint scheme from Hasbro definitely enhances this head, making it look much better than the old one. The digital printing technique means you can see some lines for the wrinkles on his forehead. The green now stands out much more in his eyes, and I do like the shading for his eye bags. It adds so much character to the head sculpt knowing that Norman Osborn is quite mentally troubled. I think the metallic flecking comes out quite nicely in the red plastic used for his torso. I do like the way that it shines in the light, and there's also some tech detail at the top. The focal point of the figure's design is that star in the middle of his chest, and because it's a separate piece of plastic, the color separation is very good and very neat. But with the metallic shine in the red plastic, you can see how obviously it's lacking on the white as well as the blue paint for the bottom of his upper torso. The shine in the paint is only obvious when you stare long and hard, but otherwise it appears very flat from far away. The same can be said for the white and red paints on his lower torso. Although the separation is clean, I think because of the richness of the colors eat away at the sculpt, and all that panel detail becomes kind of lost because of how the colors scream for your attention. I personally also feel that the blue used for this figure is a little too deep, especially when you compare it to the paler shade of blue on the artwork. So I can't fault the execution of the paint applications. I just think Hasbro probably made the wrong choices in terms of color selection. He's got the bulkier shoulder pads, and these stick out above his arm. So while it lends a bigger, more imposing presence to the figure, it kinda makes the arms look a little weird, being a little too skinny compared to those shoulder pads. Now the color separation on the arms are also very clean and neat, but putting the deep reds, blues, and whites together like this overall just seems really tacky. There's no paint applications on the back of the figure's torso, so this starts looking quite cheap as well, especially with the tacky contrast between the bright red and the deep blue. On his legs, the paint application once again is nice, very clean separations, but you can see once again that the sculpted detail and the panel lines are lost in all those rich colors. The rest of his lower legs are once again that bright red metallic plastic, no other paint applications to speak of. So overall the figure looks a little too vibrant, ending up looking a bit tacky and cheap. So panel lining will definitely help this one. For articulation, the head is on a ball hinge, so it does go all the way around, going down that much, as well as up. He also has that very little bit of sideways wiggle. Swivel hinge at the shoulders that go all the way around and coming out. Just that much. The bulky shoulder pads are a thick piece of plastic that's glued to the outside of the shoulder, so it can kind of slide over that top, but that's about as far as you can get without too much warping of the plastic. There's an upper bicep swivel, so it swings out and in, a little hindered by that bulky shoulder pad. Double hinge at the elbows, so they go quite a very good bit of range. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 swivel and going in and out. The mid-torso ball joint is quite limited, going forward just that little bit. I'll show you how to do a modification to get more range later on. Backward is more than decent. He also does get some sideways tilting as well. And just like the extremis armor, the two discs on the side do rotate out of the way so that you can fully use the outwards range of the ball joints at the hips. And those also get you forward and backward range. He's got an upper thigh swivel that goes all the way around. Double hinge at the knees for very good range for a guy in armor. I wish they could have integrated a calf swivel, but it's not there. The ankles do tilt upwards that much, downwards, and finally pivoting outwards and inwards. So now I'm going to modify the figure to add more forward ab crunch range. We do that by removing plastic from the front of the ball joint at the lower torso. So now I've heated and popped off the upper torso, exposing the ball joint. And you want to make sure you don't remove plastic anywhere beyond the part that is painted white. So I used a rotary grinding tool and removed that much plastic down the front of that ball joint. And I also went ahead and used this Gundam marker model GM01-200 for black, simply because of the dark black lining already present on his mask by default. So I used this Gundam marker to match that black paint and basically panel lined the whole left side of the figure. Now heating the upper torso and popping it back onto the body, he now has much improved forward ab crunch, and you can compare that with the picture from before. So now he should be able to get into more dynamic stances, and also bending him backwards just to show you that there's no trade-offs or extra gap in that torso despite the modification. And I deliberately only panel lined the left side of the figure so that it is pretty obvious that all the design details pops out much better compared to the original right side. Hasbro's design now stands out thanks to the black panel lining, when previously a lot of that detail was lost in those deep colors. Just make sure you commit to it, do it all the way to the back of the figure as well, and it's definitely much more rewarding to look at it this way. And if you mess up and go outside of those panel lines, you can always use a soft eraser to get rid of the stray marks. And here he is fully panel lined on all sides. It should come as no surprise that the additional forward bending range in the torso means that he can pull off a very natural looking superhero landing. When you're doing the panel lining, you gotta make sure that you commit to it and fill in all the lines on his back as well. The sculpt now stands out much better, even on the darker shade of the blue plastic and blue paints. So I think this is a relatively simple mod that everyone can do to improve the overall experience of having this figure. I would also recommend that you don't mess around with it too much after you apply the panel liner. I left it overnight to sit to give the plastic time to absorb the black color. You can still see how the black still stays, despite me doing a couple of poses of him. But as a precaution, you could leave it for 1 or 2 days. And here's a quick head swap with the Spider-Man Animated Series VHS Green Goblin. The Norman head from that figure is slightly bigger, so it looks like it fits this figure much better proportionally. And the head from this new Iron Patriot figure also works just fine on this Green Goblin figure as well. For size, Taskmaster stands at 6.5 inches and that's about 16.5 centimeters, while the Iron Patriot and Dr. Doom stand at about 6 and 5/8 and that's about 17 centimeters. For size comparisons, this is how the Cabal stands against our heroic Avengers. And here they are with other members of the Cabal and some supervillains. For comparisons with other lines, here they are with the G.I. Joe Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. This 3-pack is a solid release that bears all hallmark of Hasbro product. Taskmaster shows off Hasbro's strengths in getting weapons and paintwork spot on, but his rigid plastic cape feels stuck in the past. Dr. Doom shows progress towards soft goods accessories, but it's not quite ideal since it's limp and not posable. Iron Patriot is supposedly the lead character for this set, but ultimately is the weakest one because of poor choice of paint and material colors. I think he can be saved with some panel lining. This 3-pack hits a lot of positive notes, but also has some clear shortcomings in typical Hasbro style. Ultimately, I'm still giving this set a recommendation. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, or even hit a super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care, and stay safe.